Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. I'm Adam Simmons, and here with me is Ben Williams. Ben Williams is the COO of Exyn Technologies, a unique company, and I don't want to give too much away right now, as he's going to talk a little bit about that as we dive right into understanding who he is and what the company he works for is up to and the impact it's probably having in the geospatial industry as a whole. So, Ben, welcome to Project Geospatial, and I look forward to learning a lot more about you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, so I would start, just give me a little bit about your background first. How did you start out in the industry? And then we'll dive into a few things going into it.
Absolutely. So, I've got kind of an interesting circuitous path to where I am now. I've operated in a half dozen different industries, from active duty naval officer, nuclear engineering, marketing automation, social media, the whole spectrum of things. But I've focused throughout most of my career around operations, product development, and leadership and team building. I've co-founded a few businesses and built a lot of organizations and businesses from small to large. And so in this case, I got involved with the geospatial industry when I joined Exyn about 5 years ago. And my charter there was basically to take the early stage system, sort of a research stage system that had proved out the main concepts, take it from research project to commercial product. And so about 5 years later, we've really gone to market hard. We're doing really well in the mining and geospatial. We've got some government work. We're in a lot of different industries, and we're starting to really fire on all cylinders. So it's been pretty exciting.
So to back up a little bit, in terms of your naval experience and just what was that like transitioning from the military into the commercial world?
Yeah, it was really interesting. And, I think it was hardest because I just didn't have the context. Like, the skill sets that most people in the military build are pretty relevant for commercial world, but we oftentimes lack the language or the terminology to translate the two back and forth. So, I like to think of it as, if you don't know anything about what someone in the military does, you as a commercial employer might say, well, what do I need with someone who's going to carry a rifle around? I don't need that in my commercial business. And it takes a little while. It takes sort of education to understand on both ends that that's not really the nature of what someone does in the military, especially these days. The systems are so complex. The organizations are large. You're managing people. You're building teams. You're doing maintenance, or you're doing planning. You're doing logistics. All of these things are super relevant for most companies. And so for me, the biggest challenge was just learning how to break down into manageable bite-sized blocks what it was that I did in the military, and then reassemble those same blocks into something that looked like a commercial role. And, I had a lot of help doing that. I went to work for a former naval captain, and he would sometimes see the things that I didn't quite link for me, and he would, help me transition that way. And I've tried to give back in the same way. I do a lot of mentorship for veterans transitioning, especially into the tech world, either as founders or as employees. Been with Techstars and Patriot Bootcamp and Bunker Labs and a bunch of other stuff like that have focused on those elements. But yeah, it was a fascinating, sometimes frustrating thing. I mean, when I left my last tour in the Navy, I was a division officer on an aircraft carrier on the nuclear side. So I had about 100 people reporting to me, and I don't know, $1 billion worth of equipment. And then when I went into the commercial world, I had no one reporting to me. All I had to my name was like a laptop and a BlackBerry at the time. And no one would take direction from me. I had to sort of learn a lot more of the soft skills and how to convince people that it was the right path of action, rather than giving orders or executing to a plan, that sort of thing. So it was a tough transition, but I think successful eventually. But it's something that's nice to be able to turn around and help other folks do the same thing.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like it's successful. You're in you're COO of this new company, or the company it's existing right now. And let's get into that, right? So how did you get involved with Exyn?
So after I sold my last company, I sort of went around and talked to a lot of investors and ecosystem partners. Talked to a bunch of university, especially engineering-focused universities, and I was an undergraduate at University of Pennsylvania. Exyn is a spin-out from Penn, and so when I had gone to the university and sort of met with a bunch of people, some of the venture folks that are associated with that ecosystem. I just said, look, I'm not looking for a job specifically. I would just love to meet interesting people working on interesting things. And this was one of the things that came my direction. I did a little bit of consulting and sort of strategy work up front just to kind of dip my toe in and see what I really thought about it. And after I wrote that strategic plan, I was kind of already bought in. And so then we thought about the right role and how to bring me on, and joined as the COO a couple months later.
Excellent. So let's dive into the company a little bit more specifically, right? So from my understanding is Exyn works on lots of different things. The excerpt I got was more based off of just drone mapping in general, but drone mapping in disconnected environments, which sounds fascinating into its own right. But diving a little bit deeper into that, you don't just map it. You find unique 3D ways to visualize it as well. And there's a lot of layers to what you do, from not just the deployment of these drones and the technology itself, but the types of products that can come out the other side of it, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can think of us as a software company first that sits at the intersection of high accuracy mobile mapping and the intersection of autonomous navigation for ground and air robots, especially in GPS denied or unstructured environments. Think underground, indoors, below a tree canopy, near critical infrastructure, that sort of thing. And where we started, we got our beginning really executing with customers in the underground mining world, because if you think about it, that environment is almost the hardest possible to operate in. You are definitely not going to have GPS. You definitely won't be able to use cameras because it's too dark. You won't be able to use line of sight communications in a lot of cases, because if you go around the corner in an underground mine, that rock will block your signal no matter what. So it's a truly self-contained system. And if it works there, you've solved some of the hardest problems. And so, and as a result, very few people were even trying to solve the problem for the mining industry. So it was a great starting point for us. We've got lots of systems and customers in that world now. But what it also meant is that it laid the foundation for a really dependable, self-contained autonomy. And if you think about the idea of autonomy, a lot of people talk about it. Most of the vendors in this world will claim some sort of autonomy, right? And what it really comes down to from a practical use case is not necessarily whether you can claim autonomy, but like the end user, the survey team or the surveyor or whomever is using the system needs to know that they can depend on it day after day after day after day, or they won't use it autonomously. They'll just, hand pilot it or carry it or put it on their truck or whatever. And those are good use cases too, but you're not using the system to its full extent. And so what we focused on is making this highly resilient, survivable autonomy that you can count on, even with a lot of these edge cases. And so that's where we focused a lot of our time and effort to build out that capability, starting with drones and going to ground. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So you kind of touched on something a little bit. I want to kind of separate the two and help me define what you're talking about here. So it sounds like your version of autonomy, and maybe help me understand what your definition of autonomy really is, because you're talking more about the resilience factor, and that totally makes sense. But when you dive into more what autonomy means for your company and what you're doing with the drones, does that mean the system can kind of behave on its own? Can it automatically go through these mines on its own? And if so, how does that do that? With, you just highlighted the big problems. No GPS. How do does somebody have to walk this drone around? Do you have some type of external beacons to help it navigate through the mines? What does autonomy mean for you? And then how do you get a drone to work in an environment like that?
Absolutely. So when we talk about autonomy, there's a framework that's used regularly for self-driving cars called the SAE framework, and it goes to like level 1 to level 5, and it basically sort of lays out definitions for how you categorize a system how it interacts with the environment, how it interacts with the end user or controller. And so we modified that same structure, which is how we are tagging ourselves as what we call level 4A. And the basic idea there is that as you get higher in that autonomy sequence, there is less mental effort and input from the operator. At your most manual, everything is just pass through inputs from the pilot or controller. And at the most extreme on the autonomous side, in theory, the most aggressive level 5 is a fully self-aware intelligence, right? That sort of defines its own thing and whatever. We're obviously nowhere near that. But level 4 in this case takes the mental effort of trying to do mission planning or path planning off of the operator and puts it into the autonomous system. And so what that really looks like from a practical application is, as a user, you might say, okay, I went underground, or I went near this building, and I want to know everything I can about this volume. And you might just draw a box around something relative to yourself and go, anything that you can get to that is, 300 meters out, 100 meters either side, and 100 meters top to bottom, go and figure it out. And the system will self-define every intermediate milestone, the safe navigation corridors. It will determine how to position the system, both in terms of where it's pointing as well as where it is positioned, to maximize information gain. And the output of all of that are these rich data models that are based around 3D point clouds or 3D meshes, and then adding in other information as well, things like photospheres, temperature, radiation, gas sensing. All of these other inputs can then be part of that rich data model that is all captured autonomously and in real time, so that you don't have to have people in those dangerous environments. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. Thank you for the explanation, and just the defining that whole level 1 through 5 scale is, I think, is really, really critical. I don't think people think about autonomy, at least most people don't, in those typical layers. They think is it fully automated, or is it isn't? But there is a set of layers and a division between. You're right. How autonomous is it? And how much human input does it take, and to what degree, right? So let's talk about the what's the output of what you make here, right? So you create these maybe 3D maps. You already kind of determine, you take temperature, you take indication whether what kind of gases were underground in the mines, for example. So what does that look like for an end product that's deliverable for your customers? What do you give them? Is that in a database that is their own, or do you have a platform so that they are plugged into to get all this information in one spot?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in almost all of our environments, we are not providing the end-to-end solution, because there's a lot of established, data platforms or analysis platforms in construction, in geospatial, in mining, in ops and logistics and warehousing. In all of those worlds, there's end user platforms that we basically plug into. And so a lot of what we focus on is making our data consistent and modular and consistent with open source standards or established standards, so that we can export that data simply and easily, sometimes automatically, into those systems, so that then they're usable with their ordinary workflows just better. And so the idea there is don't try and create whole new workflows for people. Try and give them a much better, faster solution to do what they want to do better and easier. And so that's why we focus on those kind of things. And most of our customers actually are looking for just a 3D model in many cases, especially in the mining side. They go directly for the 3D structure. They don't care about most of the other sensor readings. And so a lot of our systems don't have any of that stuff. In the geospatial side, we find most of the customers want the combined LiDAR data plus visual. And so sometimes that takes the form of colorized point clouds or colorized meshes. Sometimes it means the 3D point cloud plus photospheres that get integrated into the data set. And visualized through third-party platforms as well. You can do it with our stuff internally, but the idea is always to make sure that it integrates with whatever your sort of whole facility management system is, so that you're not operating, three independent software paths there, because that's not really helpful for the end user. And it's easier for us too. It makes everyone happier. So that's kind of the idea set there.
Just because we have a massive open source community that watches us and that we support too. You touched on open source a little bit. What types of open source technologies or services do you support within your platform or your services or your drone technology?
Yeah, I mean, so for drones, for instance, most of our systems interact with some of the standard low-level autopilots like RGPilot. Those are open source projects. We contribute sometimes code to those things as well. We are regular interactors with ROS as well, which is robotic operating system. There's a bunch of other open source tools that we utilize or help with. And our core code, of course, is proprietary, so we don't repackage everything with like claiming open source in there. But we interact a lot with that. And on the infrastructure side as well, we use open source wherever we can, because why reinvent the wheel if there's communities out there already doing great work there. So I think there's a ton of interaction there, and probably the biggest ones are the low autopilot controllers in the drones, because those are pretty industry standard, open source maintained, and are just fascinating projects, really.
Excellent. Just because it's a new and emerging, but I guess it's been emerging for the last 5 or 6 years in terms of a lot of the augmented reality and virtual reality environments, and you're working on a lot of 3D mapping yourself. How involved is your company in getting some of those technologies integrated with your business line?
Yeah, we've actually got resellers already that use our systems to capture 3D data that then gets populated into AR and VR environments. We've got folks that do logistics and mission planning using 3D data captured with our systems that then go into their ecosystem. We've done example sort of captures with generating 3D environments that can be used in video game engines like Unity, and sort of building that pathway where you do a rapid capture of a real world environment. An hour or two later, you've already got a 3D environment that you can operate in, like an MMO or a large scale open world game. And that is super helpful for people that are trying to do like rapid tests of planning or logistics sequencing or anything like that, because it's such an easy way to create this data based on real world environments and be able to test it repeatedly and programmatically even in a 3D environment.
Excellent. No, thank you very much for sharing that. So in terms of, so I like asking this question to a lot of companies, and it's, you don't have to go into the weeds, but talk to me about some of the major hurdles that from a technology standpoint you've had to overcome over the years, and talk to me about what's still hard for not just your company, but companies like you to overcome with technology in the line of business you're in.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the hardest part is probably that you're using a lot of off-the-shelf components, but you're plugging them together in ways that are non-standard. And so it requires a lot of planning and engineering and like a systems engineering, really, to make sure that you are getting the systems built to your tolerances. You also are then putting them in scenarios where it's hard to test the real world impact of things, especially where you're operating autonomously in areas where people either shouldn't or maybe don't want to go. Because then if you have an issue with the system, it has to, emergency land or it crashes or whatever, it's difficult to do a rapid feedback loop, right? Where if you're able to automate testing with pure software in an environment that is digital from end to end, you can get 10,000, 100,000 reps in like a long weekend. For us to get 10,000 reps of a system operating in the real world, takes months and a lot of manpower and effort. And so figuring out how to use your time well, how to put it in difficult scenarios where you're edging into the places where you don't know what's going to happen, and testing the bounds of the system, that's by far the hardest part. The core technology we've had developed for 5-6 years, and it's been honed since then. A lot of it's finding the edge cases and figure out how to deal with what happens if you have a microclimate you get into. What happens if there's rapid condensation? What happens if you are going through rapid temperature changes, or full darkness to bright sunlight? Like what all of those dynamics have impacts on how the system perceives the world around it. And you have to be ready for those edge cases. You have to have stuff built into the system to be able to handle that kind of transition, because a person would. And so the expectation is that the system would. And again, if you want it to be utilized autonomously, it has to work almost all the time. And so you need it resilient to those changes in environment.
I was just going to say, it sounds like the theme of this segment is resilience. And is it correct to assume that, let's talk about where your company is heading, maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, in terms of how you evolve your product. Obviously it's natural for you to solve and build on that resilience factor. But what can potential customers and current customers and onlookers interested in your technology look forward to in terms of what you're working on in the future?
Well, I think the biggest thing probably is new environments. Like I have harped probably on mining quite a bit, a little bit on sort of the geospatial and construction infrastructure world. I think what you're going to see with our systems is continuous expansion of the areas in which we operate. Not because it requires a whole bunch of new development, but because we have to test it and we have to work with end customers to figure out what they actually need and just make sure that we're delivering on those kind of things. So we've got a bunch of really great partners in the geospatial and construction and infrastructure world. That's our big push right now, is to expand that footprint for the next 2 years. We're expanding into ground autonomy as well. We're integrated on Boston Dynamics Spot, and we've done Ghost Robotics as well. We'll be pushing into other systems there. Additionally, that core capability means that you can take the same device, capture in the air, capture on a ground robot, put it on a backpack, in your hand, on the front of a forklift or a pickup truck. And you can capture in all of these different environments. So you get a complete picture of whatever you're trying to capture, whether it's a building or infrastructure, whatever. And you can get that picture rapidly and regularly, so you can identify changes in the environment, or you can maintain a full digital model of your physical built environment. And I think that's where you're going to see big changes in the market, is as people get better at understanding how to utilize these tools, you're going to see this rapid adoption as, a few survey teams or survey companies start using these exclusively. And then all of a sudden they're underbidding everyone by 50% because it's so much faster and so much easier that then every other company in the competition is like, well, we got to do it. All right, let's get on board. And that's how that sea change happens, right? As soon as one person really nails it and goes, well, now we can be more efficient or more profitable or whatever, everyone else does the sort of side look and go, okay, I got it. Now we need to go. And you're seeing that beginning already. And I think you're going to just see that, catapult forward in the next couple of years.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So as we wrap up, I want to shift the conversation to a different level. Go back into your expertise, your insights of everything you've learned. So in terms of potential careers for, folks who are trying to pave their career path coming out of college, even coming out of high school and perhaps transitioning military, what types of positions, whether they're available in your company or not, what types of positions do you see in the market right now that people can get into? What kind of jobs and use cases from the skill sets. You've already said it yourself. You had a hard transition coming out of the military. Not everything was a 1-for-1, and people have a hard time understanding how to apply themselves.
Yeah. So I think, when I look at new hires, I'll answer more directly in a second, but I'll divert for a moment. When I'm looking at new hires, there is, of course, a set of skills and capabilities that are relevant to the specific job that we're hiring for, that of course they have to be able to do those. But the best indicator of success for a future hire is specifically 2 things. One, trust. If I can't trust what they're saying, it doesn't matter what they can do, because I can't trust. I need to trust them. I need to be able to trust them. And two is intellectual curiosity. If people are only doing things because I am explicitly telling them to, it can't work. Not in a small company anyway. You might be able to pull that off at a really big company where everything's very, very clearly defined and you execute to the letter of the law. But in a startup and in most like fast moving, small or mid-sized companies, I need people that are thinking, this is what they told me to do. I understand the overall vision and the high level goal, but the specific doesn't quite fit. Let me think about that. Let me investigate. I think there might be a better way. And that kind of curiosity trumps everything else over the long term, because it means that people are thinking critically about what's going on around them, and they're able to catch small things. They're able to think about improvements. They're able to move forward in their career eventually faster and farther because they have a deeper understanding of what goes on around them. And you can do this in any role in any company. Try and learn why things are the way they are, instead of just like I complained as much as anyone when I was in the Navy or when I was at Lockheed. But I also did at least learn why things were that way. I don't know if this was your experience in the military as well, but in the Navy, every rule was written in blood, which is to say someone was so dumb and they did something so dumb that you had to make a really dumb rule about it. And like the same thing is true for big companies. If there's a lot of weird red tape, it's because someone messed something up pretty badly. And they're like, all right, well, we got to make a rule because we can't have people doing that again. And so if you can understand the context there, then you can dismantle those rules if they're no longer important. Or you can argue why you have mitigated the risk associated with that rule for a particular thing. And that approach, that way of doing things is much more scalable across large company, small company, individual, LLC owner, whatever you want to try and do. So I'll circle back to more specific what I would recommend here is for people who are doing a career transition or looking at taking a next role. My personal opinion is that you should look at roles that have a skill set for you to build. I like to think about the 80-20 rule, where a new role should be 80% stuff that you can already do, 20% stuff you're going to have to learn, and continue pushing that boundary for your entire career. I think that keeps it more interesting. It means you continue to sort of question yourself and learn and grow, but it also means you're bringing value immediately. Don't take a role that's the reverse of that, where you can't do 80% of it. There's only 20%, because I think it's better to provide value right away and like try and hit the ground running. I think everyone will succeed better there. But that's my personal opinion. That's sort of how I've handled my career transitions. I focus on like, okay, next I'm going to do something that teaches me, the finance aspect or the marketing aspect, or, I want to do operational or, software plus hardware instead of just hardware, or, taking on a new incremental challenge every couple of years or every big career transition. That's, for me, it's kept things interesting. And, I think that's part of it probably goes back to intellectual curiosity. It keeps me curious.
And I understand I asked a lot of layers to that question. That's good. I want to circle it back really quick, so we can give people an idea of what kinds of positions and jobs are available to them in terms of their roles. Is it engineers? Is it drone operators? Is it that type of thing? Just give them kind of. We'll just want to paint the landscape of what kind of jobs are out there for people too. Now, with that said, I love what you said, and I want to talk briefly. I think even the military, we recognize this too. And I'll admit before, after the military, I've seen some of this, but I think it's a little bit more black and white when we're in the military in terms of, I think you have people that are really proactive about being I guess you can say innovative or problem solving or critical thinking. But then you have the other half is they just want to follow the rules, do their 9 to 5 and go home and just they don't have room to think about outside the box. And really some of that can be trained. Some of it's personality driven, and it's hard to get away from that. So yes, the military makes it very easy to people to follow the rules and be very structured. But on the other hand, there is some leverage for people to, that's how you innovate. That's how you evolve tactics, techniques, and procedures, is you rely on those folks to take some initiative and apply new critical thinking techniques. And I think that's unfortunately, there's we need more of those individuals. And I say unfortunately because I think sometimes we train people to follow the rules almost too much. But what's the fine line there? We obviously need a balance of both. So,
right.
Yeah.
So maybe more specific on like types of roles that companies like at our stage often are hiring. There's always room for technical. I think there's a lot to be said for engineering generalists, people who can play on the hardware side, the material science, the embedded software side, all the way up through DevOps and hardcore development, algorithm development, data science. All of those are important for most companies and in some way or another. I think an recognized or underutilized skill set is program management or product management. I think they're some of the most critical roles at really good companies. We have always a need for really good salespeople. And in many cases, the way to tackle a lot of these things is to learn how to listen better, because it really all revolves around customer centricity. And so a good salesperson can listen, learn, understand a customer, and then help them decide if the product is a good fit for them or not. And often can sort of say, no, we're not the right for you. This is a different system. Go use that. So in almost every different category of role, a company at our size needs those type of people in all of these roles: customer success, marketing, ops, supply chain, engineering, sales, the whole cycle. What I think is hardest is for people to figure out where their own skill set fits into a category of roles. And I don't have a great answer for that. I talked about it earlier of like taking building blocks for what you do on a day-to-day basis, try and rebuild those into reshape them into a new role. But my recommendation is, if there are people that are getting out or trying to transition into different kind of roles or careers or industries, is go start talking to people in that industry and ask what they do on a day-to-day basis, because that then gives you a much cleaner sense for, are these things that I could do or that I could see myself doing, or does that sound horrific and I never want to do that? There's a lot you can learn from just having those kind of conversations, because the titles of the role and even the responsibilities that are stated in job descriptions are often so far afield from what the actual day-to-day is, and it's not super productive. And so I think it's the first 3 steps are all have conversations with people in those industry, figure out what they do on a day-to-day basis, and see if you can picture yourself doing that. I don't know if that's helpful.
I think it is. Absolutely. It helps define things a little bit more. And maybe if I were to, you say, hey, people with product management experience or project management experience, or even program management experience, the three tiers there, right? Is extremely valuable to you. I think some folks, even coming out of the military, might, even coming out of college, might say, I have those skills, but they feel like the barrier to entry to those types of things, even though they might qualify, might be too high, because from the commercial world, they put all these stipulations on top of it. What advice would you give somebody like that who are trying to get their foot in the door from a transition of skills they know they have, especially when they probably were the equivalent of a program manager in the military,
right?
But the military doesn't make you get a certification for that kind of thing,
Yeah. So I'll answer that in 2 specific ways. For people that are explicitly in the military and are transitioning out from active duty, there are transition programs and like certifications you can get on your way out. You can get like green belt certs. You can get program management certifications. You can get all kinds of stuff. Do that. Spend the last couple of months cranking through those, because government provides for it, and it sets you up really well to transition into some of these industries. And I guess in general, one of the hardest things is that when you're making a big transition, even if you by some measure should be like at an equivalent level in a different organization, it requires someone taking a pretty big leap of faith that you can transition successfully into that different industry or different type of world or size of company or whatever. And so recognize that a lot of times the way that they'll mitigate that risk is to bring you in on a lower level, like one like level down, which might feel insulting, but I would argue that it's still fine. And as you're transitioning, you got to take it on the chin a little bit, because not everything is going to be the same, and you will have to learn a lot and get up to speed on things. And especially, I think people who take it with a grain of salt and are willing to sort of just dig in and learn quickly, they move up fast. And if you've got the experience to be a manager, but you come in as an individual contributor, you're going to show quickly. If you were a good manager, you'll show quickly that you can be a good manager, and that you can build consensus and build teams and all that sort of thing. So I think that stuff rises to the top a little bit faster than, especially at smaller companies. But everyone's situation is a little bit different. So it's hard to paint it all with one brush.
Fair enough. Well, Ben, I want to thank you for giving us some incredible insights about yourself and the company you it sounds like you're making incredibly successful. And I love hearing about your product services and the interesting use cases behind the drone technology. I know in our community, we hear how drones are used with mining and construction sometimes, but hearing the details and some of the logistics and we'll call it the interesting problems that you have to solve, especially either underground or navigating unique environments. That is an incredible story to hear, and I love sharing that. So thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, very much appreciate you having me on.
All right. Well, so for everybody's knowledge, we'll post Ben's stuff on when we post the information for the episode. Look forward to that, as well as callbacks to his website and himself, actually. So we'll make sure all that's available. So I'm Adam Simmons, Project Geospatial. We will talk to everybody next time. Thank you very much.